we're not gonna have to, I'm sorry, it's not, you know, that's, yes, it's that 259. So it's a site, so I was just, so that was all spot, it's so long, so that. Oh, sorry, man. Some people, yes, they did, you see it?
I see it.
Okay.
We have started recording. You know, and it was a good one.
All right, so I guess we'll call the regular open space commission meeting to order for April 24th, 2023. Roll call.
Yeah, Commissioner Wilson,
Here.
Commissioner Kaplan,
Here.
Commissioner Fox. Here. Commissioner Norton,
Here.
Commissioner Wallman,
Here.
Commissioner White,
Here.
Commissioner Wilson. And Councilmember Representative Deborah Harris.
All right. Next up is the land acknowledgement statement. Flagstaff Open Spaces Commission humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of the area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to indigenous peoples. And we honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home. And then, excuse me, on to the approval of the February 27th minutes. That first, I guess, and then one for March. Is there any discussion or corrections to the minutes of February 27th?
I move to approve the minutes from February 27th.
Any discussion? I do have a question. Just for clarification purposes, on page 2 of those minutes, at the last paragraph was talking about the last time open space related proposition was on the ballot and about the history of that. And it says that clarification about this came up to the city council, simply had other priorities at that time, encouraged the open space commission to do a citizen's petition. Now, my question is, was that really the open spaces commission as opposed to that advisory committee? Okay,
You're
so can we
correct.
make that correction?
Absolutely, we can.
Okay,
Oh.
that was that meeting, I think, was March 3rd or something, 2020. Okay, so
So I move to approve the minutes of February 27 as corrected.
sounds good. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. And going on into the March 27th minutes. Any discussion or corrections for those minutes? Are they okay as written? Seeing and hearing none, I hear a motion to approve the minutes of March 27th. Thank you. Second. Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, those minutes are approved as well. There. On down to public participation. At this time, any member of the public may address the commission on any subject that is not scheduled before the commission on this day. The Arizona Open Meeting Law prohibits the commission from discussing or acting on an item which is not listed on the prepared agenda. Commission members may, however, respond to criticism made by those addressing the commission, ask staff to review a matter, or ask that a matter be placed on a future agenda. To address the commission on an item that's on the agenda, please wait for the chair to call for public comment at the time that item is heard. Is there anyone here from the public that wishes to speak on the subject not on the agenda for tonight? Right. Hearing no one. So we will move on to business items. First one is the overview of funding and budgetary process. It's an informational and discussion item.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the lead in. Yep, this is the overview of funding and budgetary process for open space. And I thought I would just start out by saying, like, this past fiscal year has actually been a really great success. We hired, as you guys know, Sylvia Struess is our permanent open space coordinator. I think it's a really huge leap for us as far as expanding our accomplishments when it comes to property management and also volunteer coordination and grant applications. So that's really great. And then with our budget team approval, we also created a temporary 1-year grant funding position to help offer additional partnerships to teachers, provide outdoor educational opportunities for students. And that position has been filled by Sarah Holdicher. And she's been working to fulfill that need with teachers and students. So I'm really excited to see this capacity to expand so we can maintain our open space and inspire also next generation of students.
Is there any way you can go to presentation?
I tried, but I can't see my other portion of my screen.
Can you make that a little wider? Maybe? It's really hard for anyone to read.
There's Zoom at the top
There
there.
you go. Yeah, that's a little better. If you could zoom it a little bit, like Corinne just said. Or if you want to email it to me, I could share.
Either way, yeah, that's easier. I'm happy.
Is that better? No.
Yeah.
Well, this slide, you're actually not expected to read. Robert, why don't you email it
Yep.
to me and we'll
I'll do
see.
that right now, so.
Sorry, folks. Technology still stumps us.
After we discuss this today, can we get a copy of the
You bet.
presentation? That'd be great. Just to have them on file for reference.
Sorry, just bear with me for a moment here. My computer's having problems with connections.
It'll take it a while to come through to me, so just keep going when you're ready, Robert.
That should be. So each year we put together a presentation for our city's budget team that describes our needs and requests as it relate to the priority-based budgeting priorities and objectives that you see on the screen. This is a chart of those priorities, and open space is related to really achieving numerous of these objectives. This hopefully just kind of gives you an idea of that. We touched on a number of these. However, we most support environmental stewardship, but I think you could probably make a case that we do to a very degrees impact all of these to some degree. Our programs are ranked and should help determine submissions to the budget team for consideration. They're ranked from a quartile 1 to 4, 1 being the closest related to these priorities and 4 being least related. These are the scores for each of our programs. So we have 3 program areas for open space, and And then the other ones that you see here are for parks and recreation. So management and maintenance of our property scores 66, and then education 56, and planning 63. So that essentially amounts to two. That amounts to 2 quartile 3 programs and 1 quartile 2. Okay. And this next slide here is just a spread of the resources of the organization to kind of show you like what falls in quartile 1 for quartile 4. So open space has 3 high scoring programs that need additional funding consideration. So through our recent ask with the budget team cycle, we kept our ask very minimal. Our 3 program areas are management and maintenance, community planning, and education. You can switch to management maintenance. As you all know, we manage 3,000 acres of open space for preservation and recreation. A large portion of our property maintenance is completed with community volunteers or grant funded projects. So we're currently receiving the highest visitation ever. For this past year, we had about 100,000 visitors, 22,000, which took place at Picture Canyon, almost 50,000 at McMillan Mesa, probably due to the fire closures, 31,000 at Observatory Mesa. So
How do you get those counts? Like Observatory Mesa?
we have a trail counter, and then we do a calculation based on how many folks go past.
Is that on the Foots Trail or?
The one for Observatory Mesa on Foots Trail. We also, like I was saying, we rely quite heavily on volunteers. We've had just under 700 volunteers that provided about 2,800 hours in our preserves. They've been busy with visits from the public and also just keeping up on the management efforts as well. So moving into the future, to continue the preservation of open space and to meet that higher demand use, we did put in a request with the budget team this year to increase the management funds available for open space. Community planning is another high scoring program that needs additional funding. We do have a goal of providing protected open space and access to that open space for all city residents, eventually being able to provide access for residents with a 10-minute walking time or a quarter-mile walk, and to create an integrated open space system for the community. We do still have a substantial amount of work to do in order to achieve that goal. We also want to ensure that the community planning includes visitors and diverse demographics. Our register at Picture Canyon reported that from February to November of 2022, we had about 10,000 visitors during that time period. And around 72% of those zip codes that we reported were people that were visiting from outside the Flagstaff area. So it's just kind of interesting. And about 11% of those users were minorities, Blacks, and Indians, or people of color. So inclusive community planning is important. And then education, while we strive to provide all residents with access to open space, we're also working towards encouraging healthy community through outdoor recreation and inspiring students to learn about the natural world, to take interest in pursuing STEM careers. This program is currently supported by our temporary grant funding position. And this position is working with middle school and high school classes to provide them an opportunity to learn about environmental topics. And this past fiscal year, we had about 2,600 visitors that took advantage of educational programming, around 830 adults and 1,700 kids. So last year, the budget team approved our temporary grant funding position to support these efforts. And once we've completed this grant, we hope to be looking for other options to keep that level of service going. We don't have any low scoring PDB programs at this time. So This is a breakdown of the fiscal year 23 budget. So our regular budget is this 47,000. We did put in a one-time request that we carried forward that 11,200 for trail planning and observatory mesa that we did. And we were awarded a one-time 7,500 funds for open space management. So we had a total of 65,700. Next slide. And this is the breakdown for our projected budget for this new fiscal year. So our base budget is 47,000, and then a one-time request of 7,500, for a total of 54,500. You can see here on the right some of those expenditures that we had for this past fiscal year and are planning on for this next fiscal year. Property management, things in this category like beach repairs or siding repairs or replacement, invasive weed management, especially for fish canning the continuation and completion of the observatory mesa trail plan, educational programming, things like brochures and other things that support visitation. Currently providing a toilet facility, fish canning, contract work on occasion, management supplies, miscellaneous things, outreach, advertising, volunteer support, and staff training. Next slide. So our one-time expense and ongoing request to the budget team would increase our open space operating budget with an ongoing 7,500. This previously was a $15,000 budget increase request, which the budget team reviewed and approved 7,500 as ongoing last year and 7,500 as an one-time ongoing request. So this approved funding enabled us to address a number of new projects this year. We did additional weed maintenance, need restoration work, and trail repairs as well. And though we've been reasonably successful in obtaining grants, we believe that these funds are necessary to really take care of projects and maintenance that don't translate well to potential flooding application. So at this time, the budget team has recommended that City Council review and approve $7,500 request as a one-time request for this new fiscal year.
Can I just clarify, because those terms sound contradictory, right? So what Robert means by the one-time ongoing is that last year, or actually I think 2 years ago, the budget team recognizes that that 15,000 that we requested should be an ongoing expense. They just don't have the ongoing capacity to fund it. Ongoing resources within the general fund budget are very hard to come by. One-time resources are a little bit easier. It is a goal of the budget team over the years to increase the amounts towards ongoing that should be ongoing. But if there's not capacity to do so, then they stay as one time. So what's happened is they've been able to fund half of our request as ongoing. So we continue to request the other half annually, and they keep approving it, but recognizing that it should be ongoing and that with a goal to get it to ongoing at some point in the future.
So that means that's 50,000, actually, that's in a seat every year.
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
And that's on top of the 47,000.
Correct. So we have been successful in increasing the open space base budget by 15,000, which was our request 2 years ago.
But the term, this,
Yeah, it's just which pot of money it's coming from and whether we have to keep requesting it every year or not.
So that's second 75 ongoing request. One finding that would be pretty easy to say, we're just out of money, folks. Right, there's 7,500 that's kind of built into a base budget, but the ongoing request money is It is much more unstable in terms of.
It is, as long as what I would say is we've received a commitment from our budget team that it's a priority for one-time dollars at a minimum, and they'd like it to be ongoing. As long as we are successful in spending that money, that's very important for us to show that we're using it. Then it will continue to be prioritized in the one-time budget process. And we just have to remember to keep asking.
Thanks for that. Yeah,
You referred to the budget team. Is this team from all of this? Budget team?
So this is the citywide budget team. So this is an internal staff team made up of the city manager's office. Obviously, a lot of folks from our finance department, and then some other departments like economic vitality, public works, and sustainability are all also on the team.
oh, great. So with a small operating budget, would you depend heavily on your grant applications? So this next portion of the presentation is just what grants that we have ongoing. We have the Heritage Grant, which is a state grant that we awarded to provide that outdoor education for students. And that's what's mainly like funding our temporary education coordinator position. We have the Catula for the People, which was awarded from a local business partner, Catula, and that's covering the remaining portion of our education position. Next slide. The Recreational Trails Program grant for Picture Canyon, which is for restoration and trails. The Arizona Game and Fish Cooperative Stewardship Grant, which will help provide access to Observatory Mesa. And that will help us implement some of the trail project plan that we're currently working on drafting with the public. Next one. The state invasive plant grant to help us enable invasive plant management and vegetation restoration on Observatory Mesa. This is a two-part grant, one which is state and one which is federal. So for a total of just under $200,000. Next slide. The Malapai Fund. This is actually a private donor that is contributing through the Arizona Community Foundation to support Picture Canyon management. So this is in process grant that could total as much as $40,000 to help us do work specifically in Picture Canyon, which is really great. And then we have some anticipated grants for this new fiscal year as well. Reapplying for that Heritage grant to fund a second year of that educational coordinator position. And on the next slide, you'll see a recreational trails program grant, one of the safety and education grants that we hope to apply for implementing some signage that we built. So we've been pretty successful in leveraging city dollars and getting grant funds. We have just a little over $420,000 in grant funds coming in. Correct.
Excuse me, Robert. What grants usually have a time frame? Well, a beginning and an end kind of thing. What is relevant to this nice little chart here with the grants? And are some of these already in existence and happening and work is doing, or some of these been applied and granted but nothing is started, or?
Everything except for the anticipated applications that I mentioned, which would be the last two, this RTP safety and education grant and the heritage grant. We have been awarded already and are in the process of. Our two big projects that are going on are still up for like securing a contractor. And that's the RTP grant, Picture Canyon, and invasive weed grants for Observatory Mesa. So we hope to start those this summer if we get a contract. So at the city council retreat this week, which takes place on Thursday and Friday, staff will be presenting our future bond items for consideration. The open space section did submit a slide related to achieving the open space system with similar content as you see here in the slide. But this time we don't have any operating capital, so having the opportunity to be a part of a future bond would be helpful for supporting the open space system. Next slide. And Rebecca Sayers has offered to share some components of the Park and Rec's 5-year plan, how this strategy might be valuable for open space.
You guys can all read this one, right? Making sure you're awake. All right, bear with me while I switch and hopefully bring this up for you. You can see it a little bit better. It's still not going to be great, I can tell you that. That's bizarre. It's a lot different on my screen than on yours. And so that's not going to work. Hang on. All right, here we go. Okay, so I wanted to introduce to the commission the way that the city budgets with 5-year plans for those special revenue funds. For example, in this case, the Bedford and Beverage Recreation 5-year plan. So that's what I've got up here. The city has several special revenue funds, BBB being one of them. The HER for the Highway User Revenue Fund being another one. Then there's enterprise funds that are funded from utility fees like our water services and trash and recycling fees. BBB, as hopefully you all know, because we need you to know because it's getting ready to come up for renewal. Funds Parks and Recreation operations as well as capital projects. The Parks and Recreation Fund gets, I think it's 33% of the pie that is the BBB tax that is collected. There are 5 different program areas that get a piece of that pie, and Parks and Rec is one of them. It is my hope that eventually we can include open space in that Parks and Rec pie. We're not there yet. I have a lot of work to do, but that's my goal. And that's why I want you all to understand what a 5-year plan could look like so that if we are able to do that, and I want to be clear, I'm not advocating to increase the amount or that 33% that Parks and Rec gets. Now, I'm not advocating or saying that we should change any of those percentages. Excuse me. But I do hope that within the Parks and Rec piece that we can have some of that carved out eventually. And it might take some code changes. It's certainly going to take some conversations with council and the community. But this is kind of my long-term plan for getting ongoing capital level funding for the open space program. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. You kind of anticipated my question, but would that require an ordinance change or anything within, within council, or is it something that can be done internally, with
It would, so that's what we're in conversation with legal right now. That's why I'm saying we're at the very beginning. We're just starting to think about this. The BBB recreation language is pretty specific, and I can bring that back to a future commission meeting if you'd like further discussion on that. It talks about recreational facilities, which I think that we could argue some of our open space amenities and trails are recreational facilities. But right now, they're not clearly defined that way. And so I certainly wouldn't want someone to come back to us and say, well, that's not what I anticipated when I voted for the BBB tax. Transparency is essential, right? There is also a section in the definition that calls out foots trails very specifically as being supported by the BBB recreation portion of the tax. So certainly anywhere in open space that we have foots trails and potentially even trails, then I think it could also support it. What also we're looking at is that the Parks and Recreation Commission is very clearly identified as the commission that is tasked with managing those funds. So to carve out a piece for open space, we would need to work on like the language based on commissions. Now, upcoming on a different agenda day, you're going to talk about, I think it's the next agenda, you're going to have a discussion on, and we're going to try to provide the history of the two commissions, how they used to be one and how they are now. So in that conversation, we can talk about all of this as well. What I wanted to do today, though, is just have you understand, at least at first glance, what a 5-year plan for the city looks like and how the Parks and Recreation Commission has helped us prioritize and plan for projects, excuse me, in the coming years. So I know that this is hard to see, however, I'll just go through the general headlines and sections. So along the top are the years. So we have in the first column of numbers is actual from 2 years ago. So that's fiscal year 21-22. Then we have this year's budget estimate, which is an exercise that we just did this month. So these numbers are not necessarily updated with that. Next year's projected budget, and then the following 4 years. So from next year plus 4 years, that's why they call it the 5-year plan. I hope that makes sense. Excuse me.
Does it roll every year?
Yes, it does. So what you don't see here is in this plan, we've actually planned for the next 10. And we have projects scheduled out in that next 10, and it just continues to roll forward, and we'll continue to plan for that 10-year period.
Thanks.
Over here on the left where it says sources of funds, the basic way it's set up is that you've got revenues at the top, expenditures at the bottom, meaning how you're going to spend those revenues. And then at the bottom, when I scroll down, you'll see there's the balance. So scrolling down, and this is just page 1, so it's pretty general. The next page actually goes into detail of projects. We'll get there. Whoops, not yet. So what I want to point out here is these bottom 2 lines where it says minimum fund balance here. There's a citywide policy that we maintain a minimum fund balance of at all times in special revenue funds of 10%. That means of the revenue that comes in, we can't spend 10% of that, so that there's always some available to carry forward. What is pretty exciting about this year's Parks and Recreation BBB 5-year plan is that for the first time since I've been with Recreation, which is over 8 years, we finally have capacity to start planning for spending on projects. And you can see that with this over under minimum line, you can see that we have a positive balance for all of the outgoing years versus the negative balance in parentheses. So that's for a couple of reasons. Last year, we requested very strongly to the budget team that they cap the transfers out of this fund for daily operational maintenance type expenses. So what was happening was, as labor costs increase, as inflation increases, the transfers out of this fund to both the parks section and the recreation section were just increasing exponentially, which ate up all of the fund balance ongoing. And so we always had either a negative capacity in the outlying years or minimal. And to the point that they would tell us, you've got $200,000 one time that you can plan to spend. And for a parks or recreation facility, that's a drop in the bucket. You can't build a building with that or build a park with that. So we would try to carry that forward year over year and maybe add it up to 500,000 to maybe do something bigger with. But for context, a new playground structure, a piece of playground equipment is easily 175,000 right now. Believe it or not, we're in the wrong business. So you can just see that just wasn't going to get the city anywhere on its goals. And so the request to the Parks and Rec Commission for projects just continue to increase, and our unfunded list was continuing to increase. And meanwhile, the BBB was just going more and more towards these daily operations, which is, they're essential, right? Our parks are essential, and maintenance of them is essential. And we have recreation centers that we need to open every day. But it's not what the taxpayers voted for. They voted for projects to be funded with the BBB tax. Some maintenance and operations, sure, but not all of it. Knowing that this is coming forward for renewal in a couple of years, we started making the case that we need to start being able to plan for projects. The budget team, thankfully, and the council as well, listened last year. They capped those expenses out, and this is a result of that work. We now have this amount of capacity, and even after we had programmed in lots of projects, which I'll go forward with in a minute, we still have an additional ongoing capacity of 400,000, which is absolutely incredible. You can see that if you carry that forward for 3 years, all of a sudden you've got 1.2 million. You can start to do some really good things with that for the community. So just in terms of how the 5-year plan is laid out and what the policies are related, are there any questions before I go into how we decided what projects to fund?
Just a question. So those expenses that stopped being taken out of here, where are they getting paid for?
General fund.
General fund.
General fund. Which is a struggle, right? Because, you know, and I have to say, this is also looking really good because the revenues are coming in really high for BBB right now. We are getting the tourism dollars in still. We never really went into a tourism recession. And they're predicted, and our finance department does the revenue predictions, and they are conservative. Like, I'm shocked at what we're seeing, and they tell me that this is still conservative. So let me scroll back up without hopefully making any of you sick. You can see the revenue projections here continue to increase from 3.8 million up to 4.2 million over the next 5 years. So now let me go through, and I know you're not super interested necessarily in what projects are included in this, but I want you to be thinking about the process that we went through with the Parks and Rec Commission, knowing that they are the advisory commission in charge of these funds and telling us how they want them spent. They finally were able to do that. Like, they were kind of struggling, like, what are we going to talk about if we don't have any money to do anything? And so this year was a pretty exciting process for them. What we did was we gave them a list of about 30 unfunded projects that we as staff knew have been coming up year over year. And we went through a ranking exercise. We did very good descriptions of each of the projects for them, so they had a very good understanding of what the project was, what the need was, what we've heard from the community, what they've heard from the community in the past or other commissions. And then we took them through a ranking exercise where they ranked everything on a scale of 1 to 10. So they didn't have to pick like their top number one that they were going to put all their points to. We made them rank each one 1 to 10 points. And then the top point getter became like the top priority. And that's how we funded, or that's how we ranked the whole list of projects. With these revenues, as good as they are, expenses for Parks and Rec amenities are so high that we got through the first 7, just so you know. But here's what that ended up looking at. And what we did as staff, knowing that we're going to need to use a couple of years or even 5 years, as you'll see, to add up funds for one larger project, for example. We still wanted money available every year to get some things done. So in every year, we set aside $200,000 for what we call deferred maintenance projects and $150,000 for play structure replacement. This will help us spread out some play structure replacements over time. The situation we're dealing with right now, just so you know, is we got a huge grant about 25 years ago, and they replaced all the play structures, or a lot of them, in the city. And so they've all aged out at the same time. And we don't have the funds to replace them all at the same time. This allows us to spread those replacements back out so that our future directors don't have to deal with that same problem. And the deferred maintenance projects, excuse me, this just allows us to have funds set aside for things as they come up, whether it be like a pump goes down at the Aquaplex, or a chiller goes down at the ice rink, or we need to rebuild a bathroom at Bushmaster Park, or a parking lot. That's what these types of deferred maintenance funds are for. But down here is where the projects that were prioritized by the commission come in. So there is a Heritage Square restroom, 250,000 set for next fiscal year for that. Ponderosa Park reconstruction. This park was destroyed by one of the museum flooding events 2 years ago, and we will match these funds with a grant and work with the community to rebuild that park. Those were the top two priorities that we could fund in next fiscal year, along with a play structure replacement and deferred maintenance. In the following fiscal year, we're going to put some air conditioning and hopefully better heating in the Hal Jensen Recreation Center. And start some additional cleanup, $200,000 worth at the Thorpe Park site that council just approved a concept design for the future of that park. In year 2 or year 3, I guess, of the 5-year plan, we want to start building a Cheshire Park expansion. And then in years 4 and 5, there's split over 2 years. We want to start working on Continental Park to start building some girls softball fields. That's been a top priority of commissions for years and city councils. It's just never been funded. This is maybe going to get us 1, maybe 2 fields, but at least it's a start in the right direction. So not to belabor you with what these projects are, I just wanted you to see how a 5-year plan works and maybe start thinking about if there were funds similar to this available to open space, which is my goal. I think that that would meet a lot of the needs of the open space section. And I think it would help meet your needs as a commission, as you're seeing projects that you want, or even land acquisition, that we can start building up a fund for land acquisition to meet these accessibility and connectivity priorities, right? So that's my goal. It's a lofty one, and I'm just gonna work it at every angle that I can without hopefully making too many people mad at me. And I think that this is the future of the open space funding in terms of long-term funding to help you meet your priorities.
How does Parks and Rec feel about sharing their funds with open space?
Yes, they don't know yet. No, I actually think they'll be fine if they were able to do that, especially given that we were able to fund their top 7 priorities and we still had money we found out after. So the reason this 400 is available, this 400 ongoing that I showed you, is because the revenues were updated after we programmed the first 5 years of projects. And there was even more, these numbers were updated and it showed that we had more. And I said, well, to me, I want to hold on to that for now while we have these conversations. We're still getting some incredible things done for the Parks and Rec Commission. And what you don't see is in years 9 and 10, we've actually built up, I think it's 5 million total, to start building out that Thorpe Park concept plan that just went through city council. So we're still meeting a whole lot of their priorities that haven't been touched for 20 years. So I think if we can start setting aside even 200,000 for open space, it's a lot. It's a step in the right direction.
It's good, accumulated and that's, so we have that decision.
Thank you for speaking up for open space.
That's my job.
The other questions or comments before we?
I guess I would just, if I could share, just summarize the reason I think it's clear the reason I wanted to share that with you, but I know that this commission has has had a lot of conversations and you're getting ready to go into your strategic planning discussion, right? And that a big piece of your strategic plan is looking at funding and how, how do you recommend funding for, well, that feels a little uncomfortable, I think, as a commission, because sure, you can say, well, city council, we should do a bond, or city council, we should do a tax, but ultimately, it's a recommendation that needs to come through staff. It goes through the budget process. That's how we got a slide on that Robert talked about for this long-term planning that will be included in this council retreat discussion Thursday, Friday as a potential bond project. So we're still working those angles. We're going to work all of them. But ultimately, it really falls back on us and the as staff and the budget process. And so I've just seen the Open Spaces Commission over time kind of struggle with that question, and you can make those recommendations, but ultimately they may not go anywhere. So and then that's frustrating, right? So then what's another way that we can get into the standard budget process? Because that's really our job. And that's where I think part of the struggle is. So as you're going into the strategic planning conversation, maybe now you can look at that piece of that document a little bit differently. And I think Robert and Sylvia worked up some language to help you think through that a little differently, and maybe relieve the pressure on the commission as to looking for new funding sources, and put that back on us where it belongs. In my opinion. Happy to have you disagree. If you think otherwise, I'd love to hear.
Well, it certainly makes sense where there's language to support it. So the bus trails definitely fall under parameters of using BBB monies. Bus trail and something else,
Recreational facilities.
recreational facilities, so where there's sets or where there's actual facilities at space areas. And that just makes sense, you know, we can slide that over and concentrate elsewhere.
I have another question. I see a recreation, open space trails and active recreation. Are they all funded under Parks and Recreation?
So now that we are the Parks, Recreation, Open Space and Events Division, they're all managed by us in one division, which is nice. Open space used to be with sustainability, so
But the trails also,
so that yeah, the maintenance of Foots Trails is funded within our programs, yes. So the Parks team has a very small but mighty team that is charged with maintenance of Foots Trails.
so here's a question. Personal opinion here, I think the tread in Buffalo Park ought to be upgraded in a way that makes it more likely to be used in all seasons. That could be $1 million easy, because it's 2 miles long. Does that fall under open space? Does it fall under Foots? How does that all work together? And that might give me a hint on how trails and other places.
That's a great example because Buffalo Park is managed by Parks as a park versus open space, but it is a passive park. And so it's managed as a passive park. And then they work very closely with Martin Ince, who is our transportation or multimodal planner, to prioritize Foots projects and his department health funds as well as part of the BBB recreation tax. So the loop trail through Buffalo Park is both a foots and a park amenity. And for those of you familiar with it, it's got that exercise and now updated some exercise stations around the loop. It also has a new surface that is new this year, and there's some new accessible or disabled parking spots being installed right now. That's all part of the grant program to make that whole trail loop more accessible. So it kind of is one of those areas where we're all super interested in what goes on at Buffalo Park, right? Including open space, even though it's not necessarily a natural area or managed by open space. We talk about Buffalo Park. Amy Hagan is our assistant Parks and Rec director, and Robert and I talk about what's going on at Buffalo Park on a regular basis. Just because of that, because it's still, since it's a passive park, it still feels like open space, and it acts like open space. It might as well be open space. Has a trail, it has a restroom, has a parking lot. Fewer, more, a little bit more amenities than some of our other open spaces do. But maybe that's an example that we look for in the future, not to that scale for sure. But, I think that's a good example of where we all just work together to make sure it's the best. And it's funded from different sources, but it's managed within.
Yeah, okay, so it's funded from different sources. And then as far as the observatory mesa and the trails that are developed out there, that is open space. Does that limit where funding will come from? That's there to take off the park, but the trails up there.
So that's one of the things that we're talking about as well. We need a better way to maintain our open space trails. Certainly Robert and his team have done incredible with grants, but eventually we're going to need to expand the maintenance team personnel resources in order to maintain open space. How that gets funded, I'm not really sure. But at least we know it's all within those division now. And so we're all thinking about it, talking about it. Already, Robert will call on parks if we need some sort of emergency maintenance or some assistance with something. They'll go out and try to assist as much as they can. It's a pretty small group right now, I'll tell you. It's been hard to fill vacancies in the parks team. And eventually we'll need to expand on that.
Okay, not to dominate here. I was just wondering quickly, talked about the process. What are the dates? What are the trip dates all the way around?
For the budget process? Well, they're year round. I can tell you that in general, we start in, so a fiscal year being July through June, right? So we typically start in September, believe it or not, thinking about new personnel requests or personnel changes like a reorganization of a division, new personnel requests, a reclassification of a position, which is basically reviewing a position that might be working out to see if it should be placed into a higher range. Those conversations start in September. Then in about December, I think is going to be the first council budget retreat, where they just start to get kind of the 30,000 foot view of the budget and the budget process. And we as staff get their priorities for the upcoming year. In January, we had a whole bunch of deadlines. So what Robert mentioned, the priority-based budgeting, that's a software tool that aligns our programs with the city council priorities, and it's also where we have to align our funding requests. Those are due in January. So if we have additional funding requests on top of our base budget, that's when that is due. So for Robert's case, that's that 7,500 one time that we remember to ask for every year. The 2 new positions that we asked for 2 years ago, that was included in that process. That's also the time that we start planning out our 5-year plans and updating those. And then in February, there's another council retreat where it kind of brings them down to a little bit more detail. And they start to see, we start to present to them more of the projections on revenues, any trends that we're seeing, and like any heads up, like, hey, employee benefits are gonna skyrocket this year, or minimum wage due to inflation is gonna skyrocket this year, and here's what we're doing to plan for it. That's in February. In March, the budget team that I mentioned earlier sequesters themselves for about 3 weeks, and every division comes in and gives them their budget presentation and explanation of what we need and why. This is where Robert's presentation that he gave to you today, that's his presentation that he gave in March to the budget team. And then the 3rd week of that 3 weeks is when they put together the city council or the city manager's recommended budget, which is then presented to council in April, which is what we're doing this week with the council on Thursday and Friday. So this April council retreat is really, the city manager's recommended budget is set. There might be a little bit of maneuvering by the council, but after April, we as staff get to relax a little bit. The council will approve the final budget in June, and it takes effect July 1. And then we start it all over again in September.
Thank you, thank you.
But you can tell, like, for me, it never stops. Like, we're always thinking, and this is what I'm coaching Robert on, we're always thinking ahead. And now that we're a division, we're always strategizing, like, these are our needs. What's our priority? What are we hearing from our commissions? How do we start working things into the conversation? Where do we put our chips this year? And it's all very strategic. That's at least in my experience been the most successful strategy, is being able to plan and not over ask. Like, some divisions will go in asking for $50 million every single year, and they have a $3 million budget, and it's like, it's just not going to happen. We're very strategic, and I think that you've seen here, Sarah and Sylvia are a result of that strategy being a success.
Rebecca, what do you see as our role as a commission in this budgeting process?
I want to get you some funds that you can tell us how to prioritize. That's really, if we can achieve that, then that's where it will be really important for you. For now, continue advising Robert on the base budget, on grants. One thing Robert and I were just talking about, and I hope it's okay, Chair, that I really wanted to take time on this budget process for you all to really understand and think forward. Robert and I were just talking about grants. This team has been extremely successful on getting grants. Are they grants in the areas that you think are priorities? Because if not, we don't need to be getting grants just because. And if we are getting grants that are not in areas that you deem as our priorities, the reality is with a team of 3, that takes us away from your priorities, right? Because we've got grants and we need to spend them and do the work. But if that means we're not working on something that you'd rather us be working on, then we need to think about that. And that's where I see the commission being helpful. If that helps.
Yes, that's, I see that. One of our important tasks very soon is, don't put numbers to it, but come up with a framework for a 5-year plan with our priorities and see if we have money that
Yeah.
buy into that stuff.
And that money could be grants. I mean, there are a lot of grants out there, even for land acquisition. We need to prioritize because the Parks and Rec Commission might also want that same, so Land and Water Conservation Fund is a great funding source, can include land acquisition for a park, for open space, for a rec center, for any, it has to be outdoors. But the city can only put in one application a year, and then we can only have one project at a time. So if one project is still going, then we can't ask for money from that fund the next year. So we need to be really strategic as a city.
See when
Yep,
this law project is gonna end so that we can put in
right.
and not say, oh, wow. It ended last year, we should have put in a report.
Right, and that's where too, like. The part, here's where we're gonna need to plan ahead. The Parks and Rec Commission might want us to go for a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant to help build girls softball in years 4 and 5, so that maybe we can get 2 or maybe 3 fields built. If we could also use that money for, I guess it's not an and, it's an or we could go for a LWCF grant to fund acquisition of open space. And it takes a really long time. Those LWCF funds it's a federal process, takes a really long time. You understand, to get through the whole process, right? So it's kind of a 3-year ordeal. By the time you apply and then get the funds and then you're able to spend the funds, especially if it's land acquisition, you've got property negotiations, you've got all of that, you've got federal procurement requirements that go. So like a LWCF project is going to be probably a 3 or 4 year project. If we're counting on that for girls softball and we're counting on that for an open space acquisition, we have to be really careful about how we plan those out. Makes sense?
Well, and I would imagine too, the more you try to acquire, the more you have to maintain. And then you cut it out the funds to that as well too.
And that will always be a conversation. Always. And we're dealing with that even just on the parks maintenance side. Parks maintenance staff don't just maintain parks, they maintain foot trails. As you've heard, we keep adding foot trails, but we're not adding to the maintenance funding or the staffing to go with it. We don't have a repair and replace fund. We have asphalt foot trails out there, which when you were talking an all-weather surface, I will say we should never do asphalt again. Because it requires repair and replacement, and it's really hard to do for for a fence trail. Even when it's adjacent to a roadway. So, you know, those are challenges that are always out there. You know, the city as a whole has to deal with that. But yeah, it's absolutely true.
When you mentioned the Continental Park, the expansion of it for girls softball, that area is also a priority for open space too. So it's like, so maybe there is a way to get one grant for two purposes.
Absolutely. The nice thing there is the city already owns the property, as the commission knows, up to I-40. There are 2 private parcels in the middle that would be great if the city could get, and I think that's what this commission has talked about. Then it would make sense for parks to develop the southernmost to be the active amenities, and then have the northern property reserved for open space with some trail connection up to the Forest Service and state land property up to the east. I think that's what this commission has talked about. And yeah, if we can plan all that together as one granted project, I think that would be great. Yeah, for sure.
And that's all I have.
Great.
Yeah.
Great discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I am glad that the conversation went to like towards like overlap in your goals and objectives, along with budget. So I wanted to kind of go back to that before we move on, see if there are any comments about our current project selection, our current grant selection, whether or not those do align with the commission's objectives. And I think this is a good lead in as well, where you go with your strategic plan finalization.
Talking about the 2 grants that are in the process. Is that what you're asking for our opinion on?
I'm asking for any input you might have for planning expenditures with our base budget for the new fiscal year at $47,057,000 and future grant applications. The ones that we have applied for, we're committed to finishing, but we're looking at new grant applications.
I have somewhat of a blank, maybe because I'm new, maybe because I'm old, about what the current priorities are. I know you've got a big list. I'm not sure, as I remember, what is graded as the top 2 or 3. I'm sure all those discussions are going on. I've read the strategic plan, but I haven't got a feeling exactly how that relates to funding. That's one thing. Then part of that discussion then would be not only the city funding, but the grants that we go for. And just saying it's a wonderful big amount of money for invasive weeds at Observatory Mesa. If my experience is the invasive weeds that exist now are due to the trimming of the thinning of the forest. And my experience is that with time, things correct themselves. So how much money do we want to spend on maybe hoping that go along? And I'm not a biologist, so I'm just an observationist. So a grant like that is great, and I'm just wondering whether there can be more to it than the invasive weeds. Maybe there could be improvement of some of the riparian areas on the mesa. This old tank, is the old refilling of the Railroad Springs tank. Spring is running again for the first time in 20 years. It used to be ever filling that tank. The Marshall tank area, carrying area around there. Wondering if the invasive invasive weed effort could somehow mold over into that, or blend into that kind of thing. So it's kind of drifted, but that one caught my eye as being a great deal of money. A lot can be done with that, some of which, as far as invasive speed, sorry about that. I must be hungry because I keep saying tea. It's something that continues on and on. It's not something that a grant can say, we've done it, done it. So you'd love to have some of that money to do something that may have some continuing impact too, for long. So that's just the thought. And qualify everything I say is, I'm a newbie in this. People have been working on this a lot harder. So when I raise these questions, it's not, oh, you forgot this or you forgot that. No, I'm just trying to learn in the process. So back to my original thing. Does this commission have already more top priorities? Which it might go with, or is that something we should be working on now?
To kind of add on that, I mean, when we looked at the priority list originally, that was more with an eye of acquisition, wasn't it? Can we maybe revisit that whole topic with, with the grant and other things that might be a priority of the commission? If I remember right, it was just kind of a priority list of acquisition properties.
Yeah, we can revisit that. To try to address some of the questions that were brought up, I do think that probably the biggest chunk of our funding probably is the invasive weed treatment. And it is an ongoing project, like the longevity of like seeds for especially like Scotch thistle is like 10 years. So we've been treating weeds at Fisher King, and I think probably since it was purchased originally. It still has to be an active like project out there for us to keep it maintained, especially because like we need other property that doesn't get treated and those seeds come back in. But we certainly can have a bigger discussion about like expenditure planning for the year. Yeah, if there's things that can do to help support the discussion, I'm happy to do that.
Jumpstart, the conversation a year or 2 or 3 down the road. Get to that point.
Yeah. And then you had some questions about the grants and basically grants. The scope of those grants are actually pretty narrow and limited. So it is mainly to do 2 years of treatment and 1 year of reseeding. So if there is some restoration in there, but doesn't include any of the tanks or anything like that you mentioned. And the restoration portion would be like the treatment is for, I can't recall, but it's like at least 100 some or more acres of the 2,200 acres. And it is trying to focus on the areas that were more heavily impacted during the same process. Yeah. From what the fire department has explained to me, that shouldn't typically be a problem. Like we get a lot of invasive weeds that come after like the full project. But for some reason in the past project, the chippings were piled up on the ground rather than being piled directly into a trunk or something. And then when they go to remove them, you're not supposed to break ground when you're picking chips up. So some of the chips got left behind, and that heavy mulch has like cause some invasive, or there's some of the native plants to die and allow invasives to move in. So the restoration portion of that project will be trying to remedy some of those old chip piles by perhaps removing some of the mulch, reseeding it. So, but those other projects that you mentioned, I think are really great ideas. And to this point, we really haven't focused on some of those bigger projects because of our just limited funding. So we're more just focusing on like maintaining basics right now. So, you know, trail repairs, replacement of signs, a toilet facility, fisher cleaning, invasive weed things. But I think that's a great exercise for us to do, to talk about expenditure planning, where the commission's priorities lie. Certainly do that.
Not only for acquisition, which of course really important, but people have been saying, get all this stuff and we don't maintain it. And we're in a new. Well, maintenance is not sexy. Buying stuff, building, that's sexy. Making sure that the downspouts work is not.
That's a good point, though. It's important to show that we're maintaining the current property. If the strategic planning shows that we want to complete all this.
Can't take care of what you have, one more. So. For me, one of the priorities before I forget it, same similar vintage as Dr. Whiteman, would be to not only maintenance, but restoration of vegetation in those, in the open space areas.
Pretty well. I think our direction is to put something on your future agenda for talking about that.
But the perfect segue into the strategic plan review.
Yeah, it would be.
So Robert, do you want to share the track changes one?
Wasn't sure if you wanted to start with this one or not. So really, it's up to all of you. What's more helpful for you?
The track changes one.
Okay. So I know that we've recently been talking about this and quite bit, so I didn't want to belabor this, but we tried to capture essence of what we were talking about in the last couple of meetings. Sylvia incorporated those changes, and I'm going to briefly kind of go through those with you and get your feedback, whether you agree or disagree, and whatever changes you want to implement.
And so after the last meeting too, I got Commissioner Wilson's comments, which I integrated. Those are mostly in the appendices and fairly small changes, so. But in yellow here is Commissioner White's proposed changes. To add a preface that there's this strategic plan, and then there's the appendices that go with it. And I also added that in the appendices too. I added a sentence that said this is a two-part thing. Be sure to look at the other part. And so I think for the vision, just shortening it to a connected system of open lands that supports passive recreation, protects the natural environment and ecosystem, enhancing Flagstaff's quality of life. Shortening the vision to that. Shortening the mission to be to advise and advocate in support of the expansion and maintenance of the Flagstaff open space system. By the way, we did our research. This is the Open Spaces Commission with an S, but everything else is referred to as open space. So, you know, I did go through and change that, but I didn't want to do all the track changes with it because it would be a big mess, so. To simplify the role of the Open Spaces Commission, established in Flagstaff in 2003. So it's the same wording, we just took out the second sentence. And then adding, there was your comment had like how, why, and we just put that together into background. That the Flagstaff Open Space System is a network of minimally developed, that's how we referred to it in the previous plan, public lands that feature the natural environment, wildlife corridors and habitat, trails, unique geological features, views, and greenway corridor connections throughout the city. The regional plans and Vision 2020 have consistently demonstrated for over 3 decades strong community interest in preserving open space within and outside city limits. They promote health, physical and mental. Open space is an asset that many cities have lost, but continues to be part of the Flagstaff quality of life. The commission holds the perspective that land is a living resource for the use and enjoyment of present and future generations. The commission supports Flagstaff Open Space section by assessing available lands, developing an inventory of existing and potential open spaces, following a strategic plan, contributing to a master plan, collaborating with related city departments, and advocating for maintenance and land acquisition funds. Each fiscal year, the commission will review progress and update the strategic plan to ensure goals, strategies, action items, and priorities are relevant. So that sentence actually got moved from up above. Through its advisory capacity, the commission will share opportunities, concerns, and ideas that further the vision and mission of the open space system. So those are the big changes up above. Well, okay. And the other big change was around strategy 1.3, because as we were talking about it, scroll way down to because Commissioner White's comment was needs further discussion, and we were sort of discussing it amongst ourselves too, is that maybe the goal isn't just about Schultz Creek. Maybe the goal is to make sure that never happens again. Not that we can't keep it from happening again, because if something is incredibly needed like that, but can we create a process by which people have to come talk to the commission and get the advice and counsel of the commission about how to proceed and how to replace the loss of any future open space? So that's why we took out the old strategy 1.3 of replacing the loss of Schultz Creek and put in develop a standardized process for reviewing projects and proposals that affect open space properties to ensure compliance with land conservation and management policies. And there was, Robert found a previously developed, well, that's too many words, previously developed developmental. Okay. See, it helps to give yourself a few days and go back. So there's a development review protocol that started to be drafted. It is very wordy. I think it can be simplified a lot, but that was our thought in this strategy 1.3. And I don't know if you agree with that or not. So open for discussion about strategy 1.3.
Yeah, I think limiting us to just the Schultz Pass event is neglecting the opportunity to talk about it in general in the future, it can happen in the future. So I like what you've done, and I like the, it'd be fun to get at the development review protocol that you found and see how it can be made concise. That would be a performance measure that you could check off.
I have some questions about the wording. On action item 2. And different use of open space properties. Does that mean the spaces that are officially designated as open space, or is that open space in the city?
Should be legally designated open space.
Okay,
Thank you.
I also want to think, the commission has made and can make recommendations, as far as I understand, on other open space. It is not just on managed open space. So, for instance, the commission provided some feedback on this way to Waterloo. We have there's an open space property there, which is not managed by our program, but that is within the commission's purview.
Okay, so the answer is any open space.
I believe so. Unless, well, Rocket, do you have anything else about that?
I just want to be careful because some city undeveloped land, let's call it, does have, excuse me, some intense, not intense. The council has intended it to be for housing, or it's managed by stormwater, or it has some future intent that the city council has already established. So I want to be careful that the commission doesn't get crossways with a previous council's intention for the use of that property. Especially given that the city has declared a climate emergency, a housing emergency, it can put council in a difficult situation if they're saying this property is perfect for housing. And the Open Space Commission is like, yeah, but I just want us to be really cautious about where the commission spends its energy and time. I think your top goal would be protecting the legally designated open space. Certainly, as projects come through what the community may deem as open space, or there's a perception, or the council hasn't designated that property for some future use, then, we may bring development projects through for your input and guidance. That property that Robert referred to, you all were able to give really clear guidance on restoration. That was better than what they had previously done, which obviously didn't work. And I think that's the case moving forward for at least the rest of that project and hopefully others. It set a good example. I just want to be careful how broadly you reach, if that makes sense, Robert.
And there is some property that has a sign that says it's open space. But it's,
the sign may be gone, but that's where, like, there may be a community perception of a property being open space, and we need to be cognizant of that. But where those signs were placed, over 20 years ago. Did not go through any real vetting process. It was just a city planner at the time that thought he would make up some pretty signs and go put them up. Just in case everyone was wondering about that history.
I-
Does that help?
I was involved in that history.
So maybe it didn't go through no vetting, but
At that time, there wasn't process, it was
Yeah.
predates Open Space Commission, all of that. The council felt that these particular areas were significant. And at least one area over there by East Flag, it was a trade-off. Gas station is on that corner.
which one are we talking about?
Where my shopping center is, right off of Cedar. Gas station on that corner. It was supposed to go across the street
On that triangle.
on that triangle. And so the trade was, okay, you could have this corner, but we'll keep this corner for open space. And it was that time, it wasn't official open space discussions, but the concept was there. And that's why that sign went up there. And a similar situation over there where Sawmill World is. That was considered a space because of the flag and where it was. The city property, it also had some historic history attached to it because the railroad came up through that area to bring logs to the sawmill. And that's why that one went up there. But the big picture is that there wasn't an open space thing, but there was an open space concern and we need to do something about it. And that was the way we did it. It was also at a time when the city manager did not like open space. And so it couldn't go further in that direction. So.
Well,
Paul Harvey said that's the rest of the story.
I appreciate that history, but you brought up what I think is a good example. So that triangle by the Cedar Safeway has not been managed by our program. Certainly there's an interest, but it's been looked at, the city council has looked at that for housing. And now it needs to be used most likely for stormwater. To help with the museum fire flooding projects that are going in. As part of that suite of spruce wash
Yes.
projects that were just voted on in November. There's likely a detention basin going in there.
I hope it's a multi-purpose detention station. And it has some nice environmental aspects to it. But you're right, and
That's why
it's our fault, I mean. It sat there for all these years with that sign on it, but no official designation.
Yeah, and I that's where it gets tricky, is even when we have an official designation, like we did for Schultz. If the council deems a higher community priority like flood mitigation. You can make your recommendation and ultimately that's what it is. It's a recommendation. If the council then weighs all of the recommendations and makes their decision.
Just to make good quality recommendations with facts and everything to back it up.
I agree.
I have one other question on strategy 1.3. Action item 4. It says propose an alternative city property. Do we want to confine that to just city property? Because there may be something that's not city that would be great for it and could be wish list for purchase.
So just take out the word city, propose an alternative.
So would it be like city-owned property or just property within the city, you know?
Well, because if we're talking about state property, then we have to buy it,
Right.
right? And so if it's city property, if it's already city-owned property, then the the proposal would be, okay, you take this property and we'll take this other city property.
But maybe there isn't,
But maybe there isn't, right?
but there is one that's just across the property line. And I hate for us to say, well, it's not in the city, so we can't say anything.
So I'll take out the word city, and then at the top, at strategy 1.3, I'm saying develop a standardized process for reviewing projects and proposals that affect legally designated open space properties. Instead of just open space property.
That'd be a good way to define.
For develop.
Sorry. Turn another one.
You know, it's fine.
Does anybody have a good word offhand stuck in private? Instead of saying previously developed development.
Previously created. Previously established.
Wasn't really established, it was drafted. How about draft?
There you go.
Previously drafted. Okay. Okay, any other comments?
The last one. Talk about.
There is, strategy 1.4 below, but I think we didn't have any changes on that.
We changed, instead of saying make recommendations to Flagstaff's legal department and city council. And we just took out legal department and city council and made recommendations on changes to city code. Because we don't want to jump over the chain of command, right? Vote on adopting the strategic plan.
Can we don't, on the agenda, it's not a decision. So we bring it back next meeting and be nice to put it to bed.
Sounds good.
It didn't sound like we had too many major changes at this point.
It's based on previous conversation and Rebecca's comments about funding. I'm now a little uncomfortable with strategy 2.1. And all the way back to 1.1. Because I'm reading again quickly, so I haven't really thought through it, but this looks like strategy 1.1 is really about buying stuff and getting stuff land, rather than also providing an opportunity to look at development, restoration, enhanced investment in appropriate infrastructure, for example. And then so that's 1-1, and then on 2-1. Maybe back off a little bit in terms of our involvement.
Well, I think at the last meeting, we talked, the commission said, how can we be helpful to the open spaces section? And it was doing that research about how other open space programs are funded and generating ideas for us to then present to the budget through that budget process. So I did take out, make recommendations to city council and just wrote, make recommendations for appropriate sustainable open space funding strategies.
So I think it can still apply even based on what I said earlier, because we will have to go through a process, including some ordinance changes, code changes, to, if we want to move forward and if we can move forward on that BBB money, the commission will need to make those recommendations to us that you think it's a good idea.
Okay.
So I think in that context, your input will still be essential.
Okay.
Even though I've already told you that's the direction I'm going, until I get told to stop. But in terms of specific language for the code changes, like we'll need your input on that.
And under 1.1, what I'm hearing you say is maybe add an action item about creating a priority list for maintenance and projects.
Necessarily need to go all the way to that specific, but include some language that where we can make as part of our priorities. Investment, it's not just to call infrastructure investments.
And expanding on point number 7.4, where it's just specifically about acquisition.
Yeah, I would like to add a separate item, because the 2, 3 is gone, right?
2 got replaced, yes. No, you're right.
So does this sort of start to bring back in some of the stuff that we ended up putting in the appendices, you know? But because that's where like all the maintenance for like, restrooms and trail boxes and signage and I think at the time when we first started this endeavor, it was like, well, that was just part of your normal budget, like within your department. It wasn't really under the purview of this commission, so it kind of got separated. I feel like maybe if we start really defining our maintenance goals, we're kind of going back to where we were,
Okay,
you
then I wasn't clear then, what I'm thinking about here is that, for example, I think it'd be worthwhile to have for the commission to be able to put in as a recommendation, and if we ever do a 5-year plan for vegetation restoration. based on this list, I can't see where we could.
No, you're right, that's not in those, that list of appendices either, you know, of things that happen on an ongoing maintenance basis, so.
You know, if the strategy is to create an open space master plan, what would you have in that master plan? Could be acquisition, could be maintenance, could be conservation, restoration. All of those would be part of a master plan, wouldn't it? And I tend to agree when I look at this. It does kind of indicate that the main priority is to get open space. I think we could be general enough to say, yes, open space acquisition. In fact, I think this could be shrunk a little bit and be more specific and say, open space acquisition, that's one thing. Maintenance is another thing. Restoration is another thing. I think, as far as acquisition concerned, there'd be subtitles like, and it says here, it makes the open space system more of a system. I get kind of distracted when it's number 3, when it lists all of these parcels. Which I can remember, I've gone through a lot of thought and prioritization. But I do think that the appendices would serve that purpose. And a list of separate priorities.
So A through G, I do not want us to lose it, because that's really.
Yeah.
But that may be more appropriate in the master plan, one of the appendices.
Yeah.
That can be updated very. But as necessary, because even though you have the such as, people start looking at that, oh, those are the only ones they care about.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully there are other ones they care about, too, we just don't know about.
I'd like to see the list stay there, at least until we get to the master plan document,
Okay.
and then it could be pulled out. So I just, you know, I think those kind of still need to be front and center in our mind. This is what we have our eye on. Although I might be a good idea to add, you know, 0.7 and 8 that is more specifically about maintenance and restoration. Add in those goals as what would be part of the master plan.
It sounds good.
And we can say, you know, one of our other priorities recommend management. How we manage the basic things.
Thank you. So bring this back next month and with a.
Let me ask you that.
Let's
Keep it on there until we're done.
I kind of look at it as like moving into a house or something. You don't know what you need to do until you've been in the house for a while. Maybe this is, if we live with what, you know, I think we're close. And I think that we can always revisit in the future, but I think at some point. So, yeah.
It seems to be, in my mind, serving 2 purposes. One, somebody in other departments or a city council member or somebody get a quick review of what we're doing. But it also becomes a reminder of what we want to keep.
Agreed.
Anyway, I mean, 1.1, it really becomes the framework of what the master plan is going to be.
Yeah, right.
And next year, when we redo the strategic plan, you know, we can simplify all that because we'll have created a master plan.
Another, I think, point that maybe Rebecca brought up earlier is that also can help you guys make sure that your ideas are aligned, help us align with your programs. yeah, so we appreciate you guys' input on this. I know it's not always the most exciting topic.
It's really, really important or else we just allow it.
Is there any other comments on this particular? We have about 5 minutes left. So,
That's good. Next up was the reports. Council Representative report is under Harris here
no, I don't.
and Planning and Zoning Commission.
Probably most of you have heard about the last month has all been about the Northern Arizona Healthcare specific plan and the rezoning for those phase 1 parcels. So both at our March 22nd and our April 12th public hearings, they both went 4 hours each with, presentations from staff and the applicant and lots of public comment. And the commission had lots of questions of both the applicant and the staff. So it was a very robust discussion. And then an additional 31 had to be added last week for us to, as a commission, talk about it. And that's what went down last week. But during that month of meetings, what work continued to be done between Northern Arizona Healthcare and city staff. And by last week, we at least got to see the draft of the development agreement and the verbiage for the public access easement for the open space / civic space that's part of the development. And so the 2 land use parcels, they equal about 35 acres total within the big development. That'll be open space, civic space, and there'll be some connectivity to the Foots Trail, which is the main Foots Trail that's within that property is the Sinclair Wash Foots Trail, and that remains. So there'll be some connectivity there. There was also continued discussion about the type of active recreation component that would be created in one of those parcel areas. And there was some agreement between Northern Arizona Healthcare and city staff on the types of things that might be developed, like outdoor fitness loop with equipment, a small active fitness court or courts, or an outdoor gym. And so I was really pleased to see that those details were coming together. And I feel that staff and Northern Arizona Healthcare did a good job of addressing those needs for the city and that are important to pros and this commission. So that was all good news. That was a part of the application that I thought was pretty well done. And then last week, like I said, that was the time for the commission to talk about and discuss and make the recommendation to council one way or the other how we felt about it. And there remained a lot of concerns about the development, primarily on issues of sustainability, location for some people, the size and scale, public transit, and some of the funding that's still to be determined, both in terms of pending grants and how the city is going to fund the city's portion, as well as ongoing operational and maintenance issues, especially with regard to fire. So those are some of the big issues that the commission and the public couldn't really get past and had more questions for city council that they'll need to address. So the commission voted to recommend to deny the application for the specific plan and the first rezoning based on those concerns. So it'll go to city council with that recommendation. And that there'll be another public hearing on May 2nd in front of city council. So they're still taking public comment and during that public hearing. So it'll be up to city council to go a little deeper and decide, will ultimately decide, whether to approve or deny or continue to work with the applicant and city staff and take it from there. So it was
It ain't over.
very interesting. What was that?
It ain't over.
It's not over, no, and it shouldn't be. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff to it. It's just, this needs more work. Yeah.
I understand that there's a component of open space related to Sinclair Wash, like 10 acres or something. There's any discussion about what exactly does that mean? Is that providing buffer to the?
Yeah, it's a buffer on the side of the Foots Trail, so the Foots Trail stays there as it's,
in
the
the same
easement that it is right now is not gonna be moved, but then there's expanded space to the side of it, and then there'll be,
versus like a long strip on
yeah,
either side.
yes, that stays. And then that wellness center, sort of to the west parcel, there'll be some connectivity of trails that'll get you up to the Sinclair Wash Foots Trail. So,
It is 65.
Yeah.
So, I'll think about other updates for you guys and I'll send you an email. Sure, these updates. I think we can skip there.
All right, so. Number 9, any informational items to from commissioners and staff?
Just a quick question. Is it possible to have commission member names at the desk here? So that if we wanted to come in and say, hello, or I've got a question, Robert, that we don't get the answer, you have to have an appointment. Can't go in that area, it's a special area.
Are you referring to like name plaques for like the desk here?
No, I'm referring to if I came, your house here, right?
Just ask for us. So seriously, if you guys come in and want to see one of us, I'm here almost every day.
Yeah.
I might be at a meeting.
Yeah.
But, and then Robert and Sarah and Sylvia kind of split their time in the office.
Mhm.
So just ask.
As-
Ask for me or Robert to see if we're here. And they'll let us know and we'll come out and get you.
Yeah.
So you're saying like,
I came in and asked.
let them
and-
know
and
and
then-
let us
and then go
know.
and see Rob. And I didn't want to discuss it any further, so I said, thank you.
That's hilarious because I've seen people just walk right by and they don't ever stop him. And I'm like, that kid just like totally walked right in and didn't pay. And they're like, oh, really? So.
Right. So, what, yeah, whatever works, it's just, that was the experience I had, and I didn't want to.
And I mean, I would say because we do have a lot of meetings and that these guys aren't always here, it probably is best to have an appointment. Just so that you don't come all the way up to here and we're not here.
Yeah, shoot me an email and we'll set something up, but you can just say like, I'm gonna pop after. You can say I have an appointment if you want.
I'm not right and I don't know.
Thank you.
So I do have another item. Yeah, I'm going to be out of town the next meeting. So I'm hoping the vice chair Kaplan can chair the meeting.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. I will try to participate at least by phone. Sure. We'll have internet capability.
How many do you need? Four.
I appreciate it.
I will be out of town. I'll be in Paris.
Yeah.
That else don't show up.
Visiting my niece.
So that's 3. Will the other 4 of you be here? We heard from Chair Applin that he'll be here, but
And I will be on the phone at least.
we hope.
I just might not have.
Is Jillian still on the?
I haven't heard anything from her. Yeah,
Yes,
I don't know.
Yeah.
But we do have application selection by the city council on May 2nd. So those applications are ready.
3 lots and 4 applications.
All right, anything else? We can go. Read the future agenda items on the. On the.
Yeah, we've got two future ones for next month. But yeah, think about what you like on your agenda.
And I guess we'll go, since it's past 6. I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed?
Me. I'm saying I'm not opposed to it.
We are adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Saturday. I've never seen that many people.
That's what I keep hearing. Yeah, I'm a couple of weeks ago, it's too busy.
The waterfall.
Oh,